Yo, what up guys? It's Flark, and I've almost run out of melee to Zug on. I mean, we got Reddit enhanced, and that's about it for these pre-patch guides. I'm leaving Rogue and Hunter to somebody else, okay? I know they're technically melee Survival Hunter and the Rogue specs, but they're not the same thing. All right, you can look elsewhere for those guides. But let's go on with Ret Paladin. Again, these Dragonflight Prepatch guides have a little bit of mixture of Shadowlands stuff and Dragonflight stuff, and really all of our focus will go into the Dragonflight talents, because that's going to lay the framework and the ground work for the new expansion, so we can build those synergies and understand the class going into Dragonflight. Ret is, as a note, really interesting in that it gets its two best covenants from talents, and they're really easy to access and really strong. So I ended up, the covenant section at the end will be a little weird, so just spoiler warning alert for that. But yeah, we'll just go right into it and we'll talk about your itemization to start. So again, pretty easy. Ret loves Verse and Mastery. Those are the burst stats, and Ret does a lot of burst. Then right below that is Haste, and it's very, very powerful to fit as many globals during a Wings window as possible, but then Sanctified Wrath also gets a ton of value, because the more holy power you can generate and spend, faster globals, faster resource gen, spends more Sanctified Wrath bursts, and you're just constantly nuking people. So it's like Verse Mastery up at the top, Haste just below that, and then Crit just below that. Crit is not a horrible stat. It doesn't give you really any additional benefit, so it is just worse output than Mastery. But, you know, big verdict crits are still pretty insane, so it's not terrible. A burst spec always loves crit. It's just unfortunately the lowest one in the totem pole here. But then you're going to get the Unity if you've got one, double legendary as we've talked about a million times, and then finally the Final Verdict legendary was amazing all through Shadowlands, made it so you could cast Final Verdict while disarmed, so effectively a disarm did absolutely nothing to you, made it ranged, full of holy damage, just a nuclear hit that ignored armor and terrorized everybody for an entire expansion. So congratulations on that. Pair your badge with wings. That's really easy. It makes your wings do more damage. Smiley face. And grab a two-handed weapon with Celestial Guidance on it. Easy. Okay, that's gearing. That's probably the fastest we've run through that, so we can get straight to the meat of it, which is what you guys actually care about. And I've noticed is pumping out these pre-patch guides. I've noticed that most of these builds, they could be supplemented with an entirely different build. And it was like, wait, that build is still good. And then wait, couldn't you change these things out and have this build be really good? And as a result, it's like, I feel like Dragonflight is going to be very hard to make a concrete guide for people, but I'll be theory crafting every day to try and get that for you guys. But Ret, anyway, what I'm saying is Ret has a package that is inherently bad in a PvP environment, making it a little less difficult to pick the right stuff. And I'm talking about the Consecration package. As a Death Knight player, let me tell you the pain of trying to work around something you have to put on the ground. That was Night Fae DK in Shadowlands. It never worked. No matter how many times they buffed it, no matter how much power they put into it, it never worked, because you had to have this clunky effect in these huge maps, especially on like RBGs, even huger, where people have to be standing in the ground. Of course, you can set up around it, but the payoff is never worth it. In fact, the ability has to be so much better than any of the alternative choices, because the other choices probably don't have that much of a downgrade in a PvP environment, that it just never really happened. So what am I getting at here? The Consecration package, probably not really a PvP thing, right? So you're able to kind of work around those and get the bursty talents without moving much through that, and you'll see how I have that in just a second. So let's talk Ret talents. So of course you get the first few are always, core abilities, core mechanics. We've got Blade of Justice, Divine Storm, Art of War. You need those procs. They're part of the toolkit, right? And then down here, you've got the Art of War package, making it reset more often, which is really good with Ashes to Ashes, which we'll talk about in a second. And just gives you a damage buff to it as well. But this is just a standard package that smooths out the rotation of Ret Paladin. Then you get Divine Storm, which is your AoE ability. We're going to talk about Crusader Strike, or actually we could do it right now. There's a Crusader Strike package, which is giving it a second charge, making it so it makes your Divine Storm free and deal more damage, which is great. Free cleave. We know how valuable that is from Shadowlands. And then we have even over here, we can reduce the cooldown of those charges, and it also can make your next holy power spending 1 less, which is really nice because, again, holy power spending it as fast as humanly possible is great during wings because they do a ton of damage and they proc Sanctified Wrath, which also does a ton of damage. So cool. That's a Crusader Strike package. It's buffing Crusader Strike to make it more available more often and buff your other abilities or make them usable in the first place. Awesome. You Shield of Vengeance does a ton of damage, absorbs a ton of damage. It's pretty universally applicable. You got some mastery buff here. Wake of Ashes is a key ability. We used it all throughout Shadowlands. It just cranks. I went with the standard burst wing setup instead of the ramp wing setup because I think having on-demand damage is so valuable in a PvP environment. We saw that all through Shadowlands. Again, you just press your buttons, put them in a Hodge, Stormbolt an off target, you know, and just go, right? So you don't want to be building up there. You want to just go. You want to be immediately accessible or have immediate access rather to your highest amount of burst possible. So cool. That is the crit chance from wings. All right, let's talk about some other good stuff now. Right down here at the bottom. So we've got Divine Toll, which I said that's the Kyrian Covenant ability. I told you we would be getting that. That's really good. You have some judgment modifiers and some judgment effects that make it even better, actually. And it just does a ton of damage while buffing a lot of your abilities because it has those judgments being fired, which has effects on their own, which we'll talk about in a second. But also, this does affect Lawbringer, so you get judgments out for everybody, and then you use Lawbringer, which does a lot more damage. And then you have extra judgments from Divine Resonance that also proc Lawbringer and also proc other things that proc from Judgment. And now you all of a sudden have this nuclear go where you press Wings, press Divine Toll, press Wake of Ashes, press your Spenders, and very, very difficult for people to deal with because it's a Covenant ability, and Covenant abilities were meant to be good. But in addition, you can kind of get the Necrolord Covenant ability. Do you see this? Your next Templar's Verdict to automatically activate Divine Storm with 25% increased effectiveness. That's what Vanquisher's Hammer did. All right, that's what the hammer does. So now you get that judgment, you get the Vanquisher's Hammer effect, effectively. And now you're not only putting out a ton of judgments, putting out a ton of Lawbringer, putting out a ton of Sanctified Wrath using your Spender, but then your Spender procs another Spender that does a lot of damage and has a damage buff attached to it. So yeah, that's the Ret way, right? They add all these modifiers to a single hit and then have that hit proc additional hits, and then those procs proc additional hits, and you just have this one button that hits 40 times and every hit is insanely hard. So cool, you can still build that. Still pretty dang good. So just avoid, you can see how we just kind of carefully treaded around the consecration talents, and then over here you have the judgment damage increase, the judgment chaining to a nearby enemy. That's fantastic because we saw the judgment modifiers that we want, so making it do more damage, and cleave is really nice. Gaining more holy power is great for the synergy with Sanctified Wrath. And again, Sanctified Wrath is over here. We haven't even talked about it yet. I know if you're confused because you didn't play Shadowlands, I'm sorry about that, but it does exist, and there it is, in case you were curious. Yeah, and then you got Healing Hands. It tended to be better than Selfless Healer through the entire expansion, so I'm assuming Big Word of Glory heals are still going to be the move. Finally, you have Ashes to Ashes, which is kind of, it's not part of any package nearby. It's actually part of the Art of War package, as I talked about earlier. And that more Art of War procs that you get from those talents, increasing the proc rate of that gives you more Seraphim, and Seraphim increases your damage by a lot. Literally a lot. It's all these secondary stats, extremely valuable. And if it procs at the beginning of a Hodge and Wings, good night to the enemy team. They shall be missed. Okay. Again, Ret Talent's a little easier because again, we dodged a lot of these consecration effects and consecration effects, right? And there's some more consecration effects out there that we're kind of just trying to dodge because again, too clunky for a PvP environment. Okay. So Hammer of Wrath, rotational ability, Blessing of it. We're going over to the general talents. As you can see, Hammer of Wrath, rotational freedom is key utility for you. You've got some auras that just do party-wide effects, which are just nice, and they help you get to the bottom rows, which you need, like Blinding Light, which is a 6-second CC that doesn't even break from your own type of damage, which is holy damage, so you can actually do some of these setups where you blind somebody for 6 seconds and only hit them with the holy abilities and then hodge them out, and they're like, wait a minute, I just sat 6 seconds of CC. Now I'm like 30% health, and you'd like pretty much guaranteed get their trinket and panic. It's really cool. But yeah, blinding is also just a great CC. Hodge blind is a long CC chain. And then of course you got more movement. You know, Ret can be considered our wheelchair class when queuing into like Frost Mage, or maybe even locks with those permanent curses. So Divine Steed and then Divine Steed's second charge is really nice. Because that gives you mobility when paired with Freedom and Unbound Freedom, which is a PvP talent. We'll talk about those at the end. Okay, wings. You need wings. This is your button that you press. So you need wings. Great. Fast Hodge is good for obvious reasons. It's your big 6-second stun. The faster this can come up, the faster you can do those extra goes. Fantastic. This is what I was talking about, how Judgment buffs your other abilities. The Greater Judgment right here. Next Holy Power ability is buffed. That is exactly what I was talking about. Then you got your kick. Every melee needs a kick. Damaging Holy Power abilities deal 10% more damage is just a no-brainer. It's just a passive damage buff. You get a little bit of damage explosion here as well, which is just passive damage being added. But here's the real good stuff. Blessing of Sack is a huge utility button. Blessing of Protection is another huge utility button, this time in the form of survivability rather than just CC break and survivability. You can also use Ultimate Sack, or sorry, Blessing of Sack to buff your next Judgment, and we've seen how much modifiers that has. So that ends up doing a sizable amount of damage, especially if your maximum health is increased from any way, like a stand buff. Then we have Divine Purpose, which is just even more holy power spenders that deal even more damage. And yes, they're free. And this is why having a lot of haste, in addition to that Verse Mastery core, is much better than just putting it into crit, because you can see how many globals you want to get out in a short period with all these free buttons and proc buttons and everything. And Divine Purpose is just another one of those. Finally, you get even more value during wings to have 8% more mastery. God, Rets are going to be hammering. 4% haste, which we just talked about why that's a great stat. And finally, here is the big daddy, Sanctified Wrath. Wow. So this combines with Avenging Wrath. You can see this at the end. And it does exactly what I said. When you spend Holy Power, you blow up, right? So this is just an addition to Avenging Wrath. So when you have Avenging Wrath up, so when you have your wings or your proc wings or anything, and you spend your Holy Power, you get all the damage from spending a Holy Power ability, and then you get the damage that Sanctified Wrath adds on top of it. And that's where all the multiple hits are coming into. I told you I would get to it eventually. I would never break a promise, I hope. Okay, great. So that is pretty sizable damage. Decent utility still has the same utility toolkit it always has. Decent mobility toolkit as well now that you're allowed to run Cavalier more often. And really high burst and more frequent goes with proc wings, which you still have. This is a PvP talent, so let's talk about those now. This is just called proc wings. You get Avenging Wrath from a proc. That's really good because you saw how many modifiers it has. So if you can proc this out of your regular go, you can get cooldowns and hodges even when you don't have wings up. And that's effectively what terrorized the ladder for 2 years. Ret Warrior, that's what they were doing. They were proc wings, because if you traded your walls for their wings and then they got another one, you're like, dang, I don't have any walls left. I guess I'm dead. And that's what Rets do to you. So very fun. Then there's Lawbringer with all the Judgment modifiers. I was talking about how I think this will be very good. Of course, as a Zug Zug melee, I must use all the damage modifiers in my guides, but of course, maybe you should swap out, this is a crit chance, which we already talked about how that can be valuable in a bursty meta, but of course you should probably swap this out to Blessing of Sanct. This is a no-brainer utility ability. It gets your partner out of so many types of CC effects. Not only can it get them out of CC so they can top you, most CC effects are chained, like stun into trap or stun into fear. So if you press Blessing of Sanctuary on them, not only are you getting them out of that CC, but future CC, and it can effectively entirely negate a go. So yes, my Zug Zug melee and me wants to recommend Vengeance Aura, but my slightly less stupid but still pretty stupid says fine, run Blessing of Sanctuary. It's absolutely insane, and there's probably no situation you could ever take this off your bar. So there it is. Had to be honest about that one, of course. That's a very, 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 very good ability. There's no situation you can really not run that. Okay, cool. So those are your talents. I really do think this is the core that you'll be working with. You can just add things like Final Reckoning and Virtuous Command. as you get to 70, because in order to add any other packages, you might have to go through like the consecration package, which I already talked about. I really think it's going to be bad. So this might be a really good baseline for Ret Paladins going into Dragonflight. And I hope that I'm right about all this, because then I would feel good about giving you guys a great floor to start the new expansion. So tell me what you think, and if you have any thoughts about that or the consecration package as a whole, you know, feel free to leave comments below. Of course, that's where the build will be as well, in the description below, so you can kind of go down there and check it out, and maybe give me your own stuff and any other thoughts you have on the Ret Paladin packages as a whole. But finally, we have that weird conversation about covenants. You can see I'm Necrolord right now because I haven't swapped, because I really think I have to swap to Night Fae or Venthyr for most value out of Prepatch. Isn't that insane? Venthyr gives you massive modifiers, but you have to stand in Venthyr, which was traditionally pretty tragic and used from like boosters who would do like prop pally shenanigans. And then Summer, you can just Summer yourself. I mean, you can actually just Summer yourself, get all the mastery bonus there, and just have a massive wing Summer. I mean, you could do it because you still have Kyrian, you still have Necrolord effectively, so you'd have Necrolord, Kyrian, and a Summer for yourself. I don't see why you wouldn't want to try that. Of course, the Conduits are mostly turned into talents nowadays, so you can keep that Virtuous Command since I didn't pick it. You can get that Divine Steed duration increase, which is a massive. I didn't pick Templar's Vindication either, so this is a great pick here. Blessing of Freedom, these Echoing Blessings was fantastic the entire expansion, so you can keep this Finesse Conduit. The Wog Shield, right? And then you would run maybe the Blessing of Summer, like Truth's Wake or something for your third potency if you switched over to Night Fae. But the one pre-patch guide I'm going to make for sure, where it's like, wait a minute, all your best covenants are already taken by talents that you really, really want to take and work with going into Dragonflight. So why not just play Summer and be a self-buff Blessing of Summer Necro Kyrian Ret? I'm leaving you with that sentence. That's the most stupid sentence that's ever come out of my mouth. Enjoy. I hope you have fun. Comment below. See you around.